So I'm very, very excited to introduce Erika Stevens, our final speaker for today. Erika has acquired, edited, and developed the work of a wide range of authors over the course of 2 decades in publishing. She began her career at academic presses, including Duke and UNC, before spending 12 years at the independent publisher Coffee House Press, where she finished as editorial director. She has shepherded the work of incredible poets and writers and fellow travelers, including Latasha N, Saeed Jones, Lundy Martin, Phillip Reed, Natasha Trethewey, and Anne Waldman, among many, many others. Her authors have won many awards and been finalists for many awards, including the National Book Award, Hurston Wright Award, Penn Award, Whiting Award, Pulitzer Prize, and so many more. Erika is currently an agent with Salky Literary Management, and we are so happy that Erika has agreed to join us today to demystify traditional literary publishing, to offer advice regarding what kind of publishers write for your project, and share her personal querying tips. Again, a reminder that we have set aside 15 minutes for Q&A for this presentation, so post those questions in the chat. Thank you so much, Erika. Oops, let's get
Thank
Erika.
you. It wasn't letting me. Um, so I'm delighted to be here, and I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the passing of Nona Faustine. She's an incredible artist, and her work was just so important. And if you don't know her, I heartily recommend that you go look up her work. Um, So let me hide the chat over here. So traditional literary publishing for artists and iconoclasts, which is not a title I came up with myself. That was given to me, and I'm so grateful. But what I'm really going to talk about is a little bit of about the how, why, and where of getting published, or even deciding whether you want to get published. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of publishing talk, I want you to think about a book that you love. And there might be different reasons why you love certain books, but think about one book. What do you love about it? Is it the words inside? Is it the way the pages look or feel on your fingers? Is it the font that the words are printed in? I see a typo. I don't like that. Is it the cover of the book? Is it the trim size, which means like how big or small the book is and the way that it fits into the palm of your hand? That's a big one for me. I like a small book that fits into the palm of my small hand. So just think about what you love about your favorite books. Um, and just file that away in the back of your mind. A little vocabulary here that we're going to need to know. Some of you may already know it, some of you may not. So we're going to talk about the big five publishers. We're going to talk about imprints. We're going to talk about indie or independent publishing. We're going to talk a little bit about academic publishing. We're going to talk about self-publishing, what some people refer to as vanity publishing. We're going to talk about the list and all of its importance, and we're going to talk about the query or the pitch. Now, moving forward, the big five, the big, huge publishing houses that the movies get made about, the put upon editorial assistants are always rushing around in, are Penguin Random House, Simon and Schuster, Macmillan, Hachette, and HarperCollins. And they are the larger umbrella organizations for imprints, which were often originally independently standing smaller presses that have then sort of been absorbed into sort of this larger sort of body of publishing house. And many imprints, really have been able to retain their general ethos, but benefit from the larger umbrella, the larger sort of more resources, more just sort of the larger apparatus of a larger house. So an imprint, for example, some of the imprints under Penguin Random House, PRH, are Riverhead Books, which used to be independent. Penguin, Ballantine, Bantam, Clarkson Potter, 10 Speed, both of which are known for cookbook publishing. Random House, Dial, which is known for its feminist publishing. Knopf, which is known for its highbrow literary publishing. I mean, I don't mean that in a bad way. There's Pantheon, good for art books, good for any number of kind of books, and Vintage. I'm sure we all have some vintage paperbacks sitting around on our shelves, right? So Simon & Schuster's got Atria. They've got Avid Reader, they've got One Signal, Scribner, they've got Simon & Schuster to start with. Macmillan has FSG for our Strauss and Giroux. Also, you know what someone might think of as like highbrow literary publishing. They've got Flatiron, they've got Henry Holt, they've got St. Martin's, and they've got Tor. So think Romantasy, right? There's Hachette, which has Abrams. So think art, think children's books, think all kinds of wonderful things. Grand Central, Orbit, also Romantasy, hello. Little Brown, Perseus. And then there's HarperCollins, which has Echo, Amistad, Voyager, Harlequin. And so I'm giving you all of these examples, and it was by no means comprehensive to show all of the varied types of publishing houses that one of the big five kind of has under its wingspan at any given moment, right? So just important to know. So we're going to move on to indie or independent publishers now. So indie presses stand independently as a business. They're not owned by a larger institution or holding company, for example, right? Academic presses are often included in this category. An indie press usually comes with a mission or a specialization, say experimental literature, translation, poetry, scholarship, so on. Under kind of like the heading of indie press comes small press. They operate on a smaller scale. They're often even more specialized. So what do we mean by small press? Well, small press means different things to different people, right? So to somebody in the big five, Coffeehouse Press, or even Grey Wolf, those are just stalwart indie presses. And they might be called small presses by someone from the big five. But say someone who's at a truly small press, say, oh gosh, Noemi Press, Alice James, Phonograph Editions, Ugly Duckling, even Dancing Foxes, right? Like a coffee house or a Milkweed or a Grey Wolf is going to look pretty big. So small press, kind of keep that in the back of your mind. One person's small press is not another person's small press. We'll move on to academic presses now. They also fall under the umbrella of indie. They're often disciplinary or subject area specialists. They really drive scholarly literature. They drive literature even forward. And they specialize often in regional trade projects like regional food, regional guidebooks, even regional books about art and culture. And one thing to know about academic presses is that peer review, which is when a manuscript is sent off to a subject matter expert, that's often a part of the process. And really, at its best, I think it's a wonderful sort of an auxiliary to the editorial process when it's working as it should. An example of an indie press was just mentioned, Wesleyan Press. They do a wonderful job with their poetry lists. Duke University Press, which was responsible for pushing forward the whole like subject area of queer theory, right? Like wouldn't exist in the same way without Duke University Press. You've got Yale University Press, you've got the University of Arizona Press. And so lots of wonderful presses that I didn't mention again, but just to give you a sense. Self-publishing or vanity publishing is publishing that the author decides to initiate and pay for themselves, right? And so, people sometimes sneer about vanity publishing or self-publishing, because sometimes I think people think it's sort of like a chance for like fancy CEOs to publish their autobiographies. And it is, certainly. But it can also be a wonderful way for artists and writers to get their work sort of out into the world. For instance, I had a client that I worked with as an editor, and she had these beautiful poems about birds and about aging. And she had these lovely illustrations of birds. And the book was so art intensive, and poetry can be so difficult to get a manuscript even read, at a press. And she just decided, I don't want to go through all that. Will you please edit my book for me? And I'm going to self-publish it, and I'm going to do with it what I want. And that seems to have been, appearing, doing some readings locally, giving copies to her family. And it's a gorgeous little book. I couldn't be happier for her. It's exactly what she wanted. There are certainly platforms that help you self-publish and that promote self-publishing. I think the genres of fantasy and science fiction and even romantasy have probably been really driven in some shape and form by folks who have self-published their books. So it is an option. But you also want to be sort of aware of when you think you're approaching a publisher that is not a self-publisher and they are asking you for an upfront investment. It may be self-publishing rather than an actual sort of publisher that's going to do all the things for you, like marketing and publicity and all of this. And I'll get into this a little bit later. Okay, next we're going to talk about the list, which is the press's overall. The list means many things, right? So the list is the overall publishing program, the areas in which a press publishes, like fiction, nonfiction, poetry, or specific subject matter areas, right? A list can also mean an editor or an agent's area of specialization. My authors that I work with, those are my list. An acquisitions editor who acquires in specific areas, they're curating their list. And so it's a term that essentially means publishing partners or publishing output, right? As an author, you are on my list. My mother used to use the word list in a very different way. She'd say, you're on my list, and that wasn't anything good. All right, now we're going to talk about queries. A query is a pitch for your project. And that means sort of, you don't want to sell it too hard, but you do want to say what the project is. You want to have a short description of it. You want to have a little biographical info about yourself. You want to have a little bit of info on complementary titles or even competing titles. And you want to give an indication in your query or your pitch of why you're submitting to that particular person, whether it's an editor or an agent, and why you're submitting to that press specifically, how it fits. Let's see. So, oftentimes, you're going to want to have a little bit of extra material to follow that pitch. So we'll talk about a proposal a little bit later. And we're going to get into the big caveat now. I'm sorry, I kind of went backwards a little bit. So it's hard to get published, and having a book is not the only measure of success, and it's not the end all be all, right? It's no barometer of your worthiness as an author. It's not a measure of your success as a writer. It's simply a circumstance, right? So if you think about what you want, you can decide if you want publishing to be a part of your story and what you would like that to look like. So before you embark on finding a press, ask yourself, why do I want to be published? And you can bump the slide forward now. What's important to me in my publishing experience? Do I want a strong editorial process? Do I want a big marketing and publicity apparatus behind me? Do I want a giant advance, or am I looking for, say, a publishing home? These things don't necessarily all go together. So thinking about your priorities for your work is really important. What does success look like to me? And is my idea of success realistic in the current market? Now, that's a question you may have to talk with other people about too. So for example, poetry or, experimental fiction and nonfiction. These books, unfortunately, are not getting reviewed in the New York Times nearly often enough. They're not often becoming the book club picks of Jenna or Reese or Oprah or whoever is picking, right? So, if you're saying, oh, I want to have an Oprah book, I want to be reviewed in the New York Times, I want to win all the major awards, I want to get a Pulitzer, like think about the market and what other authors who have work that you've admired are facing. Okay, so we can bump forward now. So one thing that you are going to want to think about is whether you might want to look for an agent to help you find that publisher, that publishing home. And ideally, an agent can be an advocate for your work and for you, your first line critical reader. More and more agents are taking up the labor of the editorial work that in-house editors used to do and used to have more leeway to do. Agents have extensive insider knowledge of the publishing landscape and connections within it. So much of what I do as an agent is make connections, talk with people. Um, an agent will help you gain access to editors, to other parts of the publishing landscape, like foreign rights, audio rights sales, dramatic rights, so on and so forth. I regularly talk with a variety of co-agent types. So film agents, foreign rights agents, so on. An agent is somebody who has expertise in negotiations. They are in the unique position to be able to have a sense of what kind of the going rates are for different sorts of projects, much more than the editors at presses are, because a lot of editors at presses don't really talk about, oh, what are you guys offering for advances? What are you doing because of antitrust laws? Just plainly put. An agent can be an advocate who can represent the scope of your vision in the literary realm. I have a client I have multiple clients who are poets who have other things going. One of them is writing like the quintessential millennial novel about a slacker woman. Another person, sorry, I think my music just kicked on. I'm not sure why. Another person is writing very serious sort of experimental poetry and a political thriller, right? So as an agent, I can represent sort of the totality of my artist's visions, right? But as an editor at a press, I'm probably not going to be able to do a collection of poetry and a political thriller, because not a lot of presses have that kind of breadth. An agent can help assert boundaries on both sides, right? So if a press is pushing you or to make revisions that you don't think are right for the project, or if you are consistently missing your deadlines, the agent can be sort of the liaison who goes between and says, "Hey, let's talk about this. Let's broker a piece here. Let's set a more realistic deadline, or let's talk about these revisions." And I think an important thing to know about the agent's role in your artistic life is that when you're working with an editor, when you have a project at a press under contract or close to under contract, a good agent floats nearby and is ready to jump in when they're needed. But otherwise, ideally, that agent has a light hand and leaves space for the editor-author relationship, right? I've seen it work both ways. For example, I've seen an agent become so editorially involved in their artist's project that there was no room for the editor to come in and to have anything to say. Like when I was acquiring for Coffee House, an agent wrote me and said, "Okay, well, I have a book for you. It's really great. It just needs to go right into production because I've done all the editorial work already. You don't need to look at it even." And I thought, well, that's nice, but I don't think I agree here, right? Um, so just something to be leery of. You want your agent to be there, to be a resource, that you and the agent will probably work through an early editorial stage together. But when it comes to a project that's under contract, you want your agent to be a resource, but not to be in the middle. So, okay, ready to move on. Do I have to have an agent? No, not necessarily. In some cases, it may be better for you not to. If it comes to, entering contests, for example, or approaching very small presses, an agent just may be superfluous to what you need, and it may actually be counterintuitive. I've found that a lot of smaller presses tend to be fairly skeptical, with good reason, of agents, because a lot of agents simply don't have a clue about the lack of resources that small independent presses and small presses are facing on a daily basis. So, when you're doing the calculus of what you want for your project and what you want for your future, your publishing experience, ask yourself, do I need an agent? Do I want an agent? So, moving forward. So how will I know? Cue the Whitney Houston. So when you have a sense that you've gone as far with a project as you can, like you can't look at it anymore, you find that you're just shoving around commas and phrases and switching between which and that 18 times, it's time to let go of the project. And that's when it's probably time to query. You'll want to have copy edited and proofread the project to make sure it's as clean as possible, because typos and infelicities in grammar or language can be, a reason for an editor or an agent to say, you know what, this looks like too much work for me. Like, this person doesn't care enough to copy edit their work. Then what's it going to be like to work with them, further down the road? And if you can get a friend, if you can trade copy editing duties or proofreading duties with a friend, that's always a good way to go, because you need fresh eyes. And when you're starting to find that you have thoughts of a new project kind of intruding in your brain, like as you're trying to finish up the old one, that's a sign that it may be time to let go and to start the next phase of your project's life, right? Then it's time. Okay, so if you're going to query either an agent or a publishing house, you're going to need all the information. So a good query, essentially a letter or an email, probably an email these days, to a press or an agent, requires a concise statement of what the project is from a zoomed out point of view. You would be shocked at how often this does not come my way. And it is an essential part of knowing that an author is ready to begin to shop their project for me. If you can't sum it up, if you can't talk about it, at least from a sort of zoomed out perspective, you're probably not ready. You need a sense of your work's cohort. You need to know, have a clear sense and represent this clear sense of the contribution your project makes to various conversations, to the genre as a whole. You don't have to have like a huge section on this, but you've got to give a sense that you know what's up in the area that you're trying to get published in. You need to show that you have a sense of what your project could bring to the particular publishing house or editor or agent that you're querying. Who's on their list? What other kinds of works are they doing that are in conversation with your work, right? You need to know, you need to have a sense of why your contribution matters. Back when I was a baby editor, one of the editors I worked for told me that every project has to answer the two questions: what's new and so what? Super essential. So demonstrate a knowledge of complementary projects, demonstrate a knowledge of why you're querying the person you're querying, and a little biographical info about your past publications and your activities as a good literary citizen are important. And then next steps are, you're going to need a follow-up to that query. So an editor gets back to you or an agent gets back to you and says, hey, yeah, I'm interested. I'd love to see a little bit more. You should have a detailed proposal and sample chapters or a manuscript ready to follow that, yes, I'd be happy to have a look, right? Okay. So moving on, what's a proposal and do I need one? Not everybody needs a proposal, but I think it's good to have one regardless. A proposal is a lengthier and more detailed version of the pitch that includes samples of your work, sample chapters, for example, or short stories or whatever. Whether you need one depends on the genre that you're publishing in. You will need a proposal for nonfiction. And in fact, I've been finding that editors, particularly in the big five, prefer to see proposals with sample chapters ahead of time. They want to be able to have buy-in. They want to be able to help shape the work. And so a proposal and sample materials are what you need there. If you are trying to get a book contract with an academic publisher, a book proposal is essential for getting an advance contract. And if your work has high production value, like if you're going to have a lot of art or other design requirements, then probably a proposal will be essential. For poetry and for novels, though, editors often or generally prefer to see those complete. Regardless, though, it's useful to have a proposal or elements of a proposal to keep around for later use, because you're going to use that short description of your project for marketing copy later. You're going to need your biographical information. You're going to need to give your publisher a sense of the complementary and competing works, right? You're going to need to know how your project fits into the larger publishing landscape. All right, next. Do I need a platform? Do I need to be an influencer? Not necessarily. I mean, if you have a platform, that's absolutely wonderful. But it all depends on your strengths and your goals. Are you trying to publish a coffee table book? You might want to have a platform. Are you trying to be an influencer? You definitely need a platform. But it's more important to have a community around you, an artistic community that you participate in, go to readings, you read each other's work, you submit to literary journals. It's more important to be a good literary citizen than to be good at social media. And any marketing and publicity person at a press will tell you, if you're not a Twitter person, if you're not an Instagram person, if you're not a Blue Sky person, don't force it. Like, there's nothing more painful than watching an author who's not a social media person trying to be a social media person. Like, it can do more harm than good. So if it comes naturally to you, and if you cultivate this already, that's great. But you shouldn't do it just for your book because you think you ought to. Okay. So now we're going to talk about red flags for an agent or editor, right? So for me, a big red flag is when someone is unable to describe their project in a concise and pithy way. If they can only describe it in the voice of their main character, if they can only use like diaphanous aesthetic words to talk about the work, it's just not ready. Like, if you can't talk about your work, then you probably don't have a clear sense of what it's doing or what you're trying to do with it. And that just doesn't land well. And there's a kind of preciousness in saying, well, my work is too arty to be described. Well, no, usually not. Usually not. So another red flag is if an author says the thing that makes every single publishing person groan. Do you have any thoughts about what that is? Can I see a guess or two in the chat? Because there's one thing that authors say that for me is almost always an automatic no. Okay, I'm not seeing anything. I'm afraid to stump. I think I've stumped you. But it is, well, there's nothing really out there like the work I'm doing. Nobody else is doing what I'm doing. what that says to me is you haven't read widely enough that you have a sense of what is happening in the conversations you're trying to participate in. And that can be really damning, because if you don't have a good sense of what's come before you or the conversations that are happening in parallel to the conversations you're having, it's a bad sign. It doesn't demonstrate a knowledge of the complementary or competing work out there. And everybody has complementary work. Like, complementary work can be anything from, like, I read Maggie Nelson's Bluets 10 years ago, and it really shook me up and informed how I write, my own sort of critical theory or poetry or whatever. Or, I read Beloved, and the way that Toni Morrison uses imagery really changed my life. Those are really important comps to have, but it's also really, really important to have comps that are like no more than 2 years old, so that your editor or your agent can see kind of what contemporary conversations you're participating in. Because I will tell you, like, almost everybody lists Claudia Rankine's Citizen as a comp, right? A while ago, almost everybody was listing Maggie Nelson's Bluets as a comp, right? Right now, everybody's also listing Kava Akbar's Martyr as a comp. And so you really have to sort of think hard about the work that your work speaks with and to. And true, it may speak to those works, but they're so big and they're so important that you'd benefit from having a little bit more specificity. Another big red flag for me is when it's very clear that somebody is just using the throwing spaghetti at the wall approach. Like, they don't say why they're contacting me. They don't say how their work would fit on my list. They're just out there trying to get an agent no matter how they can. They haven't paid any attention to the fact that I don't take on projects that are YA, right? I don't represent whatever. I don't know. Like, if somebody clearly is just out there writing emails to 50 editors or agents or whatever and seeing who might take a look, I feel sorry, because that's such a waste of that person's time. Because everybody can tell when a submission or a query isn't actually considered. Okay, so enough of that. So how do you begin to identify a press or an agent that might be a good fit for you and your work and your goals as an artist, right? So first, you need to read widely, read books, read book coverage, read reviews, read around online. I mean, they used to talk about book Twitter. I no longer have any truck with that platform, but you can look at Blue Sky. You can look at where the writer discourses are happening. You can look around online, look at the small journals, look at Harper's, look at the New Yorker, look at the Atlantic, look at the Paris Review, and then look at the smaller online publications, right? Look at Publishers Marketplace too. It's the industry-wide sort of platform for talking about publishing deals, who's doing what. They often have articles that are really helpful. And it's just a really good resource to know what's happening in the industry. You want to research your options. You want to build a sense of where your heroes and mentors have published or are publishing currently. Talk with them about their experiences with agents and presses, get their advice. And this is the most important advice I think I'm going to give you. Read the acknowledgments of the books that you love or the books that are coming out currently. Those are gold mines, right? You're going to be able to see there what books your heroes are thinking and talking about. You're going to see who represented those books and where those books were published, what editors they worked with. So read the acknowledgments, read the notes sections, super important. And then I'm going to say beware, right? If a press or an agent is asking you for an initial cash investment or to guarantee a certain number of books will be sold, take good care, because that is more in line with self-publishing than it is with, straightforward publishing. Okay, so the next question, do you want to work with an independent press or a small press or a major house? Like, what's the best way to go? So it depends on your priorities, and it's okay to be pragmatic. So if you have a project and you're like, you know what, I need money and I want to try to make enough money to live as an artist, by all means, take a crack at a big press because they have more money than indies do, right? If you're more sort of looking for a publishing home, like I've got projects. I want to establish myself at a press. I want to establish myself with an editor, and I want to build that trust. Maybe an indie or a small press is more your speed, right? So some pros and cons. The big five tends to have resources, staffing, marketing and publicity. They've got bigger budgets. They have a wider reach. They've got like a bigger platform to begin with. They often can publish things on a faster time frame, right? So, for example, you want to publish, you're considering publishing with the imprint Hogarth, right? Which is under the umbrella of Penguin Random House. So Hogarth is a small imprint. They only do, I don't know, 8 to 10 books a year, I think. But they get to take advantage of that Penguin Random House marketing machine and the advertising budget. And that's something worth considering. Now, with an indie, you're going to know your team. You're going to know every person on that team. You're going to get lots of attention and care. You're probably going to get more editorial feedback than you would at a big house. At larger houses, at the big five, we're seeing a lot of staff turnover right now. There are a lot of changing editorial fortunes. I can't tell you how many people I've had tell me, oh yeah, I used to work with so-and-so, but they're no longer at that press, or they've jumped to a different press. So there tends to be a little bit more stability at indie and small presses. There is more of an appreciation of art for art's sake. The thing about the big five is that they are super inherently capitalist, right? I mean, we live in a capitalist system. There's no escaping it. There's no escaping it. But indies tend to be more risk forward. And the big five, I've found, it's not universal, but generally tends to be a little bit more risk averse when it comes to work that's a little bit more unusual. Indie presses, because they are often resource poorer than the big five, they tend to cultivate a certain amount of flexibility and nimbleness, which can come in very handy, but can also be frustrating at the same time. At an indie press, you've got a community. All of the authors who have published at that small press or that independent press, it's a community of folks who are committed to a certain kind of publishing, have made certain priorities their priorities too. An indie will often foster an author through their career. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to be okay or be able to publish a poet who is writing a political thriller, right? But, if a poet goes through various iterations, like, I don't know, maybe they're a narrative poet for one book, and maybe they're writing persona poems for another book, or maybe they're writing concrete poetry another time, right? You're probably going to have a bigger chance of having sort of consistency in your publishing experience and consistency within one smaller independent press. Smaller advances at an indie can mean that there is less pressure to earn out. Everybody at an indie gets the same amount of attention. Not necessarily everyone at a big five press. I mean, just really to sum it up, indies tend to be resource poor but passion rich. And the big five has resources that indies don't. It's kind of a trade-off. I'm not saying that one is better than another. It's just, you need to think about your own priorities when it comes to your publishing experience. So, how do I approach a press you're interested in? And we can flip the slide forward here. There are basically 5 modes of approach. There are contests, there are open reading periods. There's what I think of as like the connection approach, like your mentor or your friend, someone who's close to the press in some way recommends you to an editor or to their agent, makes that connection for you. There's the cold approach, which is basically a query. When you independently approach a press or an editor outside of an open reading period, you may meet with success. You may be told, hey, I'm sorry, I can't look at anything right now. Please submit at the next open reading period. Don't take it personally because editors and agents are swamped all the time. And of course, there are agent approaches. An agent tends to have a little bit more leeway to approach an editor in an off cycle, like if they're not currently having an open reading period, or if they're not running a contest or something at that moment. But before you make any approach, whether to an agent or to a press, and we can shift the slide forward, get to know the press, do your homework, know the list, know the press or the agent's or the editor's priorities, right? You need to study the editor's lists areas that should be listed on the website, see which editor, which agent would be the best fit for you, and come to your agent or editor with suggestions or ideas. If you're querying an agent or if you've been taken on by an agent, come to them with ideas. Say, I really like what Soft Skull is doing right now on their list, and I think my work would fit there. Or I think Orbit would be the right sort of place for this speculative fiction that I've got going. Or, you know what, I really like the way that Milkweed publishes in the area of nature writing and essays, right? So have a sense of where your work belongs already. Don't just rely on your agent for that. You need to tailor your query letter each and every time. You got to direct your query letter or pitch to a specific editor. You got to demonstrate your knowledge of the press and how your project fits in there. You need a synopsis of your project. I know I'm covering well-trod ground here, but it's just so important. Have a synopsis of 3 to 5 sentences. Know how your project fits the list, what makes it a good complementary fit, and ask permission. Don't immediately just attach the proposal or the manuscript. Ask permission to send those things. Because first of all, that is going to, that's going to ensure some engagement from the editor already, right? Because they have to write back and say, yes, please send me that. But you also just don't want to bombard people and fill up their inboxes and stuff like that. Some people may never respond to you either. And that's simply because people are getting so many emails every day. It's just overwhelming. And one thing that it's good to do is if you're making a simultaneous submission, that means submitting to more than one press at the same time, say so. It used to be convention in publishing that you would only submit to one press or one editor at a time. And you should certainly only submit to one editor at a publishing house. Don't submit to all 5, right? And you should only submit to one agent and an agency. But if you're making simultaneous submissions to a press with your manuscript or whatever, it's good to let everybody know, and then it's good to communicate clearly. Keep everyone in the loop if there are developments. Okay, so moving along, you've landed at your dream press, and now you're working with your editor. Again, your editor is an extremely experienced critical reader. You should trust their expertise, but you should also trust your own. If an editor is pushing you to make edits that just don't seem right for your project, trust that and talk with your editor about it. Come with your questions about anything that you're unsure of. Communicate sooner rather than later. The editorial process is really best as a dialogue. It's best as a conversation. This is so important. Trust your editor when they tell you that something is biased, when you're using biased language or when you're using biased constructions of reality, because they know, and they know, they have eyes on so many different types of projects that they have a really good sense of that. And then, if you're working with an editor and you're just unsure of anything, or even if you just aren't unsure of anything, you can loop your agent in anytime you want to. I love it best when, as an agent, I can just kind of lurk around, on the cover discussions or the copy editing notes or whatever. I really appreciate being kept in the loop, so that I can help keep my author moving in a direction that's productive for everyone, right? Like publication schedules and copy editing deadlines and even cover art decisions. It's just helpful to have me on the email, but it doesn't always happen. Okay, I think we can move forward. Yeah, just really to sum up, publishing is best as a dialogue, whether it's with your agent, your editor, with the larger press, with the marketing and publicity people. Ask questions, communicate clearly and early. After the book cover is already designed, it's too late to let slip that you don't like the cover art, for example, right? After the pages have been laid out and the book is already, through that stage of production, it's too late to let people know that you don't like the header font, right? So communicate early, communicate clearly, let your agent and your press's team know what you want, what you're hoping for. Don't say yes to something you don't like or don't feel confident about because you don't want them to feel bad or you don't want to be a bother. You have to be a bother. And it will be far less bothersome if you communicate sooner rather than later. Keep connecting your agent and your publishing team if you have to. That agent will fall right off of those emails, those CCs. So keep adding them back on if you feel it's appropriate. Follow up when you need to. Ask questions. Pick your battles. You got to trust the professionals on your team, but you still have to advocate for yourself. If your marketing director is telling you, hey, we really think that this cover is going to resonate much more clearly with readers, potential readers, than this cover over here that you want, it's worth considering. It's worth considering because they see a lot of covers and they see a lot of sales numbers, right? And when you're in doubt, check in with your agent if you have one, or with your acquisitions editor. It's your acquisitions editor's job to kind of be the liaison between you and the rest of the press, even if you do have an agent. So, all right, I know I'm cruising along here.
We're
Um,
just to pop in, we are a little bit past time, but if we're almost towards the end, then that's great. We can finish up and then pose questions.
That's great. You know what? I'm going to end on this slide for resources. These are good resources for anybody who's interested in learning more about publishing, who is, evaluating their options. The Authors Guild, Publishers Marketplace, which also has kind of like also a presence as Publishers Lunch. It's where all the deal news is reported. It's where they talk about publishing trends and so on and so forth. There's the Association of University Presses, AU Presses. Back in the day, back when I was involved in academic publishing, it used to be AAUP. But the American Association of University Professors also has that acronym, and so that was a little confusing. So they're now AUP. There's CLMP, the Consortium of Literary Magazines and Presses, Poets and Writers, AWP, and I can't stress enough how important it is to have a community that you interact with, a writing community, whether it's online or in person or both. So we'll end there, and I would be happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Erika, so much. I'm going to be posing some questions that we've culled from the chat. You continually answered many of the questions once they'd come in, and so
Good.
wonderful, and we're so appreciative. But yeah, so I think I'm going to do just a couple. The first question is from Chingin, who asks, I'm wondering whether Erika has seen shifts in what larger publishers are buying, acquisitioning based on what's happening currently in the US, especially targeted communities. For example, there's been more trans literature published in recent years across the board, but wondering if there's a sense of whether bigger publishing houses are more concerned at the moment acquiring those kind of titles.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big question, even within publishing communities now. Like, people are wondering, and the party line is no, no, this isn't affecting whether, um, it's not affecting how books are being acquired. But at the same time, we are seeing the growth of more conservative imprints. We're seeing the growth of more religious imprints, right? And yeah, I mean, I think as we did the first time the current president was in office, we saw a lot of indie presses really doubling down on making sure that they published voices that might not be published um, by the mainstream. And so I think we're going to keep seeing that. Um, I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that publishing by and large will continue to publish a diverse array of voices, and that if you're ever in doubt, look to the indies, look to the small presses, because I think that they are often really pushing literature forward in really exciting ways. Um, yeah, I don't know if that helps.
Thank you. Thank you. That's helpful. Um, yeah, very much a shifting landscape, and yeah, something that we're all thinking about. I also just want to reiterate and appreciate your insight about sort of staying in various kinds of writing and creative community. That feels like something that's so critical relative to the question of finding the connection for your work as well as finding the support for it. And it seems like that's going to be a lot of where we glean the answer to that in a really specific way. Um, and then,
Totally.
yeah, absolutely. Um, okay, so I have a question from Laura who asks, what if you are a writer who already has an editor's interest? You've published in the past, but you don't have an agent or a book draft. You are, working on something that, you're basically trying to start a relationship, and as you're starting the project. And so I'm wondering what your approach might be.
Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like I don't quite have enough information in some sense. So it sounds like you're working on a project, you have an editor's interest. If they are helping you develop your project in a way that feels good and right and constructive to you, that is really wonderful. That's like the holy grail. Like a good developmental editorial relationship is like worth its weight in gold. I think that's terrific. I think, just do check-ins with yourself to make sure that the direction that the editor is helping you develop your project in is a direction that you want to go in. Because I think one of the biggest mistakes a writer and an editor can make together is when the writer um, starts to revise or shape the project according to the editor's vision rather than their own. So, just make sure you're clear on your own vision. If you've got an editor who's willing to take that developmental stake in your work, that's fantastic. Keep that going. And just know that an agent's not always necessary, and it's never too late to approach one. I mean, it is too late if the book is already published because an agent's not really going to be able to help you with that book after the fact a whole lot. But
We have another question from Free for All. You mentioned that being active in a writer's community is important, and then named submitting to literary journals and publications as a facet of this. How important is it to be published in journals, magazines, online publications, etc., or is it more just creating and maintaining a presence within a circle of writers?
I think they're different things, and I think that they're both important. I do know that when someone reaches out to me and says either I am active in these ways in my literary community, or like, here are the places where I've had work published, I take that pretty seriously as a sign of their commitment to their own work. It just tells me a little something about how serious they are. So do either, do both. They're both valuable. And they both sort of say something to a person you're querying about your commitment.
Let's see. Another question from Olivia. What is a general timeline for once you're working with a publisher? If you're waiting on a solicited manuscript review and not sure if or when to follow up for a response. Same with an agent. How long should you expect to wait?
Well, that's a great question. Agents and editors are absolutely swamped right now, as they always are, but especially right now. I would say wait at minimum 6 weeks. And then just check in kindly, just say, I know you're swamped. I'd love to get a sense of when you might be able to have a look at my work. But obviously, too, if you have another agent, if you've got multiple agents looking at your work, communicate that. If you have multiple editors considering your work, communicate that. If your work is under peer review, generally, I would say give them at least 6 to 8 weeks. And oftentimes it can take a bit longer. And small presses, indie presses, are particularly guilty of taking quite a long while with the work. Fewer editorial assistants means fewer eyes on the projects.
I have a question from Sarah. If you have an ideal publisher in mind, that might be a stretch for your artistic iconoclastic project. Do you recommend querying them first, getting rejection, and moving on? Or can you send, simultaneous queries? So, but I guess maybe the route that we were trying to get at was the question of, really kind of going after the press that maybe seems like a stretch for you.
I mean, I want to know, first of all, why you think it's a stretch for you. And second of all, like, can you make a good case for why it's not a stretch? So I would say tend to that. But also, if you want to be really strategic about it, you could query some other presses first and see if you get any, feedback that'll kind of give you a sense of whether a thing is working or not working. Because, if one of the other presses that you query first, like, takes a big interest in your project, you can certainly still go out. If it's early enough in the process, you can certainly still go out and query that dream press and just say, hey, I've got interest, but I really love what you're doing, and I think my project would be a good fit here for these reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always legit to do sort of a test run though.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And then this will be our last question. And it's from Emily, who asks, what type of projects do you think work best as ebooks instead of printed books?
Gosh, that's really a good question. I don't know, actually. I really haven't given that question a whole lot of thought. I mean, I'm thinking maybe if there are sort of interactive modules that wouldn't translate well to the printed page, maybe that is good. Maybe you've got hyperlinks, maybe you've got stuff like that going on. Maybe it needs to exist solely as an ebook for that reason. But really, I can't think of any, like, other than that sort of thing where you've got a lot of hyperlinks or sort of, enhanced features that you'd like to embed in your project. I'd say go for both.
Mhm. Great.
Thank you so much, Erika. This was incredible. So comprehensive, so generous. Thank you. Very grateful.
My pleasure. And it was a joy to talk with